we're continuing with another quite impressive success story. So our next speaker is still very young, I believe 20 years old, right? Is that correct? 19, oh, this is even worse. I'm told I'm not allowed to swear on stage, but I hope they'll like beep it out. Anyway,
right.
So Sebastian Dobrincu has been a serial entrepreneur already at his age. He had positions at Apple and Facebook, drew the attention of senior executives there, such as Tim Cook, Mark Zuckerberg, and you've managed like the accounts for like famous celebrities like Selena Gomez and many others.
Correct.
So I think that was very inspiring for me to learn that, and I'm very eager to learn more from you today and inspire the audience how they can build their business and their companies.
Sounds good.
So thank you very much for joining us here in Romania. It was a pleasure having you here.
All right. All right. How's Textilvania going so far? Yeah, that guy is having fun. All right, so let's get to know each other. How many of you have dropped out of school or thought about dropping out of school? Oh, just one or two. Oh, the same guy. That's probably why he's so happy. All right, so when I was about 11 years old, I got back home from school one day and I went to check my email. I clicked on the latest message in my inbox, and in fact, it was this exact email up here. Now, being just 11 years old and making my first gig as a programmer and as a designer is what really opened up a whole new world of possibilities that I couldn't thought existed at that time. You know, realizing at such a young age that I was able to monetize my skills and my passion for programming and design is what really motivated me later to get into entrepreneurship and start my own business later on. Now, fast forward a couple of years, 8 years later, more precisely, I'm 19 years old. I've started a few startups, some of which ended up working really well. I've invested as an angel investor in a few very promising startups, and not long ago, I dropped out of school to focus entirely on my own business. Now, I'm not here today to talk about how schools could improve or what they could improve on. Instead, I'm here today to share with you the lessons that I learned from building my own business from scratch and scaling it to over $1 million in sales in under 6 months, and hopefully inspire and motivate some of you who might be interested in following a similar career. But before I do that, let me tell you really quick about who I am and what I do. So, I'm Sebastian Dobrincu. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I'm an angel investor, and I'm currently the founder and CEO of Storyheap. Storyheap is a social media analytics platform for influencers and brands. We work with amazing brands such as Universal Studios, Tumblr, HubSpot, and we help them maximize their return on investment on their social media campaigns. As you might have guessed, I'm pretty active on social media, so you can go give me a follow there. That's my username on all the platforms out there. I post a lot about startups and tech, investing. And I also write for various publications such as Forbes or Entrepreneur.com from time to time. All right, so before you even decide that you're gonna get on this entrepreneurial journey, before you decide that you're going to build your own company, you gotta figure out what is your motivation. Why do you want to do this? And I'll talk about that in a bit. But before that, I want to discuss about how you figure out what you're going to spend your time building. How do you find startup ideas? And I think the best way to do that is to actually start backwards, and not by thinking of startup ideas. And I think Paul Graham puts this in a perfect way. He says that the best way to get startup ideas is to look for problems, preferably problems you have yourself. And if you think about it, that's ultimately how some of the world's greatest founder stories begin, right? A good way to trick yourself into noticing ideas is to work on stuff that seem like it would be cool to do. That way you would basically force yourself to work on stuff that doesn't already exist, because it wouldn't be as exciting to work on something that's already out there, right? Already existed. On the same note, a fun story is how I came up with the idea for my own startup, for Storyheap. I was walking down the street in New York one day. In fact, I was up here somewhere on Fifth Avenue, and I stopped at a traffic light. Right next to me, there was this group of teenage girls, which I assume were traveling or something, because they were all on their phones and taking pictures. And at one point, one of the girls said, I hate how I have to export my Snapchat stories to Instagram. And this is around the time when Instagram rolled out stories and everyone was talking about how they copied Snapchat, yet everyone was still using Instagram stories. And I paused for a second and thought about it. I could immediately relate to the same issue because I always also try to synchronize my stories across multiple platforms, and I know how tedious and annoying that process is. And I asked myself if me and this girl who probably posts a couple of times a week at most, basically the regular user complains about how annoying and tedious this task is, how does that scale for agencies and social media managers who have to manage hundreds of accounts on a daily basis? So I picked up my phone, I texted a good friend of mine who owned a social media agency, and I asked him if this was a common issue for them. And he replied back, he told me that ever since Instagram released stories, they would basically spend at least an hour a day synchronizing the stories across both platforms, which sounds ridiculous. So that got me intrigued, I got really excited. I went back home, did a bit of research, found out that no one was actually tackling that problem, so I decided to give it a go. I messaged a good friend of mine who I've worked on a few projects with before, so I knew we had really good chemistry and kind of complementary skill sets. And finding your co-founder is a totally different subject that I think you gotta carefully consider. Ideally, I recommend you find someone who could complement your weak points. For example, as I was having a strong engineering background, my goal was to look for someone who could handle marketing or sales so I can focus more on the product development side. And he agreed, and we started working on what was going to become a Storyheap. In the next couple of weeks, I started coding the first version of Storyheap, the MVP, in about 2 weeks. In the meanwhile, my co-founder was reaching out to potential customers and getting as much feedback and information as possible on what we should build, how we should approach building our product to match their needs, what kind of pain points they're having with the current implementation. And that's how we validated our business idea. We identified a problem. We validated that it's a problem that's important enough that enough people care about, so there's a market for that. And we validated our ability to execute on that idea. Now, this one is open to debate since it's more of a career decision. However, it's undeniably true that as an entrepreneur, and especially as a leader, you have to work with things beyond your main area of expertise, whether that's product development, design, marketing, or whatever that is. Ideally, you want to have a very strong background on your main area of expertise and then build on top of that by learning more complementary skills so you can improve your overall product development ability and management. You also want to avoid falling in the trap of becoming a jack of all trades, master of none. As I said, ideally, if you have a strong background in engineering or software development, try to get as much experience as possible into sales or marketing, because you're obviously going to have to do that whether you like it or not at some point. Now, you'll also be very surprised how your day-to-day responsibilities change as your startup grows. For example, I use this tool called Rescue Time, which basically tracks how you spend your time online. And if you take a look here in Q2 of 2017, as you can see, I was spending 50% of my time doing software development. This was during the time when we were trying to figure out what we're trying to build and also working on our MVP. And if you do the math, it actually comes down at around 5 hours a day for 90 days straight of software development, which, as you can imagine, it cannot possibly be healthy for your mind or your body. And I do think that sometimes you do have to put in the work as an entrepreneur. You do have to put in the extra hours and make sacrifices, especially when you're just getting started. And to give you some context, this is the contrast. You can see about a year later, I'm handling totally different duties on a day-to-day basis. I'm basically doing a lot of more business type of stuff. I'm doing a lot of communication and scheduling, obviously, a lot of legal and finance stuff. And obviously, that's a byproduct of being able to delegate your responsibilities to other people within your organization. Now, you're probably not going to change the world, or at least not in the beginning. And you do have to realize that while the barrier to entry the startup market has lowered significantly in the past years, it becomes so much harder to stand out from the competition. And statistically speaking, your best bets are to either come up with a revolutionary idea, which is very unlikely to happen, or stand out for your execution. Just as Seth Godin said, in a crowded market, fitting in is failure. In a busy market, not standing out is the same as being invisible. And with that idea in mind, I think every entrepreneur should ask himself, what are they bringing to the table that others don't? What is their competitive advantage? How do you stand out from your competition, whether that's through a much better product or much more affordable pricing or a much better go-to-market strategy? And ideally, you want to optimize for all of those in the long run as your company grows and scales. But a very common mistake that rookie entrepreneurs and especially perfectionists make is that they hesitate to go to market with a scrappier version of their product, mostly because they feel like they're going to be judged on the initial version of the product, which not only is a huge misconception, but also a huge missed opportunity to get feedback and figure out if you're on the right track and get some advice on your product vision. And ultimately, just like Reid Hoffman famously said, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've probably launched too late. I think this is a scene that every entrepreneur does at some point, whether that's a product launch or a feature launch or a new marketing strategy or whatever that is. I know I did it a lot in my previous startups until I decided to do things differently. So this time, before we even had a product, we put up a landing page announcing our business and shared that within our social networks. And what that did, basically, we started collecting emails and feedback on how we should build a product to meet our customers' needs. And we also had a little intercom message bubble in the bottom right corner. By the way, the director of engineering at Intercom is speaking tomorrow, so I highly recommend you check that out. Super interesting company. And shout out to Intercom. And we basically used that to chat a lot with visitors and potential leads, customers, to again get a more robust idea of what we're trying to build here and how we should build our product to match their necessities. Now, another super underrated byproduct of launching earlier, or at least putting a landing page up like we did and sharing that within your circle of friends, is that you can generate hype, you can create buzz around your idea before you even start building it. We, for example, got a good amount of press before we even started. We got into very prestigious publications such as Forbes, Mashable, and that obviously built a lot of credibility early on. And we also got a good amount of customers from that, most of which are still with us today. So you can build that credibility. You never know what can come out of starting early and sharing it out there. And obviously, you create a lot of opportunity. For example, you never know when you can get an email like this from a huge Fortune 500 startup that is beyond excited to try your product and become an advocate for your brand. And a fun story is that the same company actually, a couple of days actually, after we publicly launched, was interested in acquiring Storyheap and integrating it into their own suite of social media tools. And after some back and forth with their executives, we've actually decided to decline that offer, which ended up being a really great idea. Now, being an entrepreneur is probably the closest you can get to being in a roller coaster without actually getting high. Not physically, at least. And every day you go through ups and downs, and you got to develop thick skin early on and realize that you cannot let this affect you on a personal level. Now, since your company's success depends on your ability to just keep going and maintain a positive mindset, it's extremely important to always set realistic expectations. And beyond that, this still working? Oh, you got to figure out what your motivation is to start building a company. Because if it's not strong enough to fuel you throughout the entire journey, at some point you'll have to give up, which is not what you want to do. So before you even start, you got to figure out why do you want to start a business. What is your personal motivation? And we all build businesses for various reasons. Some of us do it for just to make an impact in their own way, just to make a difference. Others do it because they're in love with the process of building and shipping products. Others do it for the money. But regardless of what your personal reason is, you got to figure that out early on, because the worst thing you can possibly do is invest time, energy, money into starting a business and giving up once you hit a roadblock because your motivation is not strong enough to power you through that hard phase. Now, we all talk about work-life balance, how we should optimize that, and not really a huge fan of that ideology, mostly because the word balance implies that there's a trade-off. It implies that you must either sacrifice your work life or your personal life in order to achieve that balance. Instead, I think we should all optimize for work-life harmony. The key difference there is that you're able to invest more time into your personal life when you have to, and also invest more in your personal life when needed. And if you think about it, it really goes hand in hand. If you're successful at your workplace, if you're happy as an employee, as a founder, you're obviously going to be a much better friend or parent, and the same goes the other way around. Now, the most common reason for which we, statistically speaking, actually, we do not achieve that harmony is because of procrastination. And I'm guilty of this. You're all guilty of this. And the thing about procrastination is a couple of years ago, I heard this quote that totally changed the way I think about procrastination and prioritizing my day-to-day activities. It goes something like this. It's the difference between the hero and the coward wasn't that the hero wasn't afraid. In fact, they were both equally afraid. However, the hero acted despite his fear. And when I heard this, something clicked in me. It made me internalize that whenever I feel down or I feel depressed or I lack motivation to do something I'm supposed to, all I need to do is act despite that emotion. And I think Nike said it best, so that's the best way you can possibly deal with procrastination. Just do it. So there you go, some startup motivation from Nike. And based on that, I personally, whenever I find myself in that situation, whenever I don't feel like doing something I'm supposed to, I just ask myself, who gives a fuck? Just do it anyways. And I think that's the best way you can possibly deal with procrastination, because the more you allow yourself time to reflect upon whether or not you should do that thing, the less likely you are to actually do it. Now, what started happening ever since I adopted that mantra, ever since I adopted that mindset, is that I started to suddenly get luckier. And luck is a very touchy subject when it comes to startups, and especially in tech. People tend to label lots of things as luck, especially favorable circumstances, for example, favorable market situations or bubbles or whatever. But I'm a firm believer in making your own luck. And at the end of the day, you got to do something in order to get lucky, in order to find that success. And because of that, I really like to think that the only proven way to increase your chances of success is by trying more. And that's what I want to encourage you all to do. That is if there's one thing you can take from today, is to go out there, build that business that you always wanted to build. Don't procrastinate on that idea that you had in mind for months. Go do that thing that you're supposed to do, because you never know what could come out of that. And who gives a fuck? Just do it anyways, right? Thank you.